Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This is yet another video about the 70th anniversary of Ian Fleming's James Bond novels in 2023 and the rollout of the new editions, which Ian Fleming Publications has taken it upon themselves to selectively edit, alter, and change, primarily for the new UK editions. And this has caused a great amount of discussion. I, of course, did a video on the subject with my own thoughts, but a part of the argument has been that if you are upset by these changes, that at the very least you can always go and get older copies, because the Bond novels have been through multiple print editions and have sold hundreds of thousands of copies over the decades. So it is possible to go and seek them out. That is, of course, logical and makes sense, and the Bond novels have always been around on the used market. I myself grew up having to try and track them down in the pre-internet days, when in the 90s here in the US, Fleming's original novels had unfortunately really fallen out of print. And so I grew up in that sort of in-between, the end of the Berkeley paperback reprints from the late 80s and the start of the Penguin era with the beautiful 2002 pulpy covers, in terms of the paperbacks, which I wish I had gotten now. I've always liked those, and I never got them back in the day. And I'll get to my thoughts on that in a minute, actually. But the point I wanted to make is that I grew up trying to find the Bond novels and having to search various, search used bookstores and rely on the handful that would be in libraries, which didn't have all the novels and only had select random ones. Particularly because where I grew up, I was not growing up in a major city, and we moved around a lot, so I was reliant primarily on the random editions that I found in libraries. So the notion of having to go to the used market or go to other sources to then have to track down the original novels, it is going to mean additional work for a new time reader who wants to read the novels. Most people probably are not going to want to do that unless they already like collecting books, or they already frequent bookshops, or they're really determined to read the original novels without alterations, if they're even aware that the new editions have been altered and changed. Now, there has been little news about the new US editions for 2023 coming from Harper Collins, with the atrociously terrible new cover designs that have been revealed for the first three books, that show a complete lack of care in this release, because they are, I think, the worst covers I've ever seen on a James Bond edition, because they are just done with there is no effort put into them. They're even using stock photos from various stock image services, and some that are so generic. I think they're all pretty generic, but they've even been discovered. You can literally look at the photo for this Moonraker cover. You can look at it on Adobe or Shutterstock, and just a basic Google image search. It's right there. But there hasn't been any news if these are going to be these new altered texts that IFP has prepared or not. There is zero information about them, and they start coming out in May of this year. And they're also going to be staggered, so it's going to be one book per month, it seems. So this is going to run into 2024 before all of Ian Fleming's books are available again in physical form in the United States. They will be released as ebooks in, I think it's 2 batches. So by June, all of the books will be back in print as ebooks. But if you want physical copies, you will have to wait and buy them one at a time until 2024, because somebody thought that was a good idea. For what reason, I don't know. Other than the fact that in the US, the literary bond has been disrespected by publishers for decades now, and it always seems like whoever has the publishing rights doesn't really care all that much about promoting the literary bond brand in the US, which still makes zero sense. I've never understood that, but it's not a new problem for those of us who are fans of the literary bond in the US, whereas in the UK, you get all kinds of wonderful press hype and special events and special editions of the books with additional content and custom limited editions and all kinds of wonderful release items. Whereas in the US, it's usually a couple months later where you get a generic edition, and that's it. And then if you don't buy it when it's in print the first time, eventually you'll get a paperback, and then if you don't hurry up and buy that, it's gone and they never reprint it. So we're kind of used to that here in the US. But it raised an interesting point because I was curious to see when the sort of typical panic buying would hit in terms of whenever something happens or there's any sort of news story, especially that gains traction. There's usually an immediate knee-jerk reaction for people to go and try to buy things up, which it's natural to want to purchase something before said item or thing is gone or is unavailable to then experience. And this, of course, has happened several times with all kinds of things, from classic films to various other bits of art and media. And in today's world, being so digitally focused, the notion of not physically owning something means you don't have access to it when the rights holder or servicer removes it from the service or decides to change something or remove your access to said material, even if you've purchased it. So you think you have merely purchased a lease to that digital material, so you don't technically own anything. That's becoming a bigger problem and a more understood problem, unfortunately, as more and more people discover that they don't actually own anything in the digital realm unless they have some sort of hard copy. So again, this all depends on, here in the US at least, because I can only really talk about the US market because I'm not in the UK. It really depends on if these new Harper Collins editions are going to be the new edited text that IFP has made, or they're going to be another reprinting of the original text just with really generic, terrible covers. My fear, and what I'm thinking these are, is that since they're handling the launch for IFP in the US, who is only doing the UK section of the business side in terms of the release, they're handling the UK release, and Harper Collins is handling the US release for them. So what I'm afraid of, and what I'm pretty sure these are going to be, is the new edited text, meaning that you will indeed have to go and track down copies of the original text in whatever form or format you wish. So that got me thinking, well, I wonder just how difficult it would be to, if it was me right now and I was starting fresh and I just wanted to read and have a copy of all of Ian Fleming's James Bond novels and the short story collections. How difficult would it be? And has the sort of panic buying hit already? How well does the argument hold up of, oh, well, you can just go get copies of the old books. They're everywhere. And again, this is all on the assumption that the new HarperCollins books will be the edited versions. Again, I don't know this for sure, and fingers crossed, I truly hope they're not. So at least there will still be an option for people to have the original text editions. But it does look like that's not going to be the case, but I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but there's no information to go off of. So again, this is merely my best educated guess. But let's just say in theory, since it is unknown as of yet, I don't think we'll know until you actually get a copy in your hands to look at if they're going to be the edited versions or not. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that they are, because they do seem like they will be these new edited versions. But let's say they're going to be the edited versions and you just want to go out and get the original books and read them. How difficult is it? So I really started thinking about this more and more when I happened to glance on eBay for the first time and seeing what some of the listings were looking like. And as a longtime Bond collector, I know about a good majority of the various editions, particularly the US ones, because that's, of course, what I'm most familiar with. And if you're a collector of anything, you know the general sort of pricing that goes with that particular field you collect. You have a pretty general idea of what things go for and what they should go for. Well, I started right off the bat seeing some pretty absurd prices floating around for all kinds of different editions. Not even, and I'm not talking about collectible editions or truly rare editions, not especially not first editions, not things that are going to retain a high dollar value. I'm talking about the standard, very common editions that have been easy to collect for a decent price for many years, and is, what is the backbone of my own Bond book collection. And when I started seeing some of these prices, and these were not inflated listings, these were listings with actual bids, with significant amounts of bids, and then sold in completed listings, so these were actually sold for that amount. That's when I started to get worried, so I decided to pursue this further. So I'll come back to eBay in a bit, but I that's what got me thinking, well, surely the books are still at least somewhat available at retailers, because for the past good number of years, here in the U.S., we've had the Thomas and Mercer paperbacks, which were done in 2012. They all have this black, white, and red matching design with some sort of image to suggest the story inside. They are trade paperbacks, and they all retail for about $15 US. Now, I just have this one of Octopus and the Living Daylights because it includes 007 in New York, and I just never owned a print version of that story. It's probably the story that's the least reprinted, and it was only included in story collections, really, in the past 15 years, really. So I just wanted to get a print version. It was the only Fleming material that I didn't own a print version of. So that's why I picked this up, because it had been included here. All of the books were done like this in a matching design. I'm not really a giant fan of these, but they're okay, and they got the job done, and they were good for what they were. So this should be what is still primarily available everywhere. If you go on any major U.S. retailer, you will still find listings for these, at least at most places. But you're going to see the dreaded words "out of stock," or you're going to see that they've simply been removed. That is because apparently it has been decided, or the contract has expired. So all of the most recent Thomas and Mercer reprints from 2012 are no longer available anywhere. And these are major retailers. So if you go to Amazon, if you go to Barnes & Noble, if you go to Books A Million, if you go to Walmart, anywhere you would most likely be getting brand new copies of books, most retailers, there is no major retailer I'm aware of that is selling in-print copies of any of Fleming's Bond novels. So right there off the bat, that's a major stumbling block for the argument of, oh, you can just buy the old ones. And this is presumably because the new Harper Collins editions are coming out starting in May, and they've taken over the rights. So that means all of the current the 2012 copies that were still in print have been pulled, and so they are no longer available anywhere. So that doesn't bode well. And then you might think, oh, well, what about other editions? And what about the ebooks and the audiobooks that have the same cover art that were done around the same time? Well, that's sporadic, unfortunately, because if you start digging around, fortunately, most of the audiobooks on CD are still available, but not all retailers have all of them, so you will have to mix and match. And then the ebooks are also sporadic in that way. Now, some of the ebooks have actually been removed from certain retailers because there are already pre-order listings for not just the new HarperCollins physical editions, but all of the ebooks as well. And if the new physical books are the edited versions, I assume all the ebooks would be the newly edited texts. And on some retailers that still have listings for the original text ebooks, well, they're mixing and matching with pre-order listings for what would presumably be the new text ebooks. And once those new ebooks come out, chances are they're going to supplant and then replace all of the original text ebooks, because again, it's a different publisher involved. So that means you're not going to be able to rely on ebooks. And then that also means, again, going back to the notion of if you subscribe to a digital service or you pay for something digitally and you don't have a physical or hard file copy of said item, then if it gets changed or removed, that you're stuck with that. So that means if you purchase the digital ebooks, but you just have them in, say, Amazon's Kindle service or something, and you don't have a physical file of said ebook, if these do get replaced by altered text versions in ebook form, you no longer have the original text as an ebook, and you'll only have access to the current in-print edition of the altered text in ebook form. And if you wanted to get a physical copy, it would also be the altered text in physical form. And since all the ebooks are coming out at once from Harper Collins in May, whereas the hard copies are being doled out one a month, I would assume that very quickly they would supplant all of the previous ebooks. And again, if these were the altered texts, probably pretty much overnight, the ebooks of the original text would be wiped out and replaced with these new altered text ebooks. So that would take the ebook argument out of the equation. So then you may ask, well, what about other editions or other versions available at retailers? Well, that's where you start to get into very nondescript and sticky territory, because yes, there are many third-party sellers on Amazon, and of course you could then go to other retailers where, of course, thrift books or other major book websites that sell both new and used books with a lot of third-party sellers. But then you're looking at a variety of different books. And then there's also a lot of listings and books being sold at major retailers that are seemingly bootlegs of the Bond novels, and very strange things that are being listed and sold under the name, the heading that they're written by Ian Fleming and that they're a Bond novel. So even that becomes difficult if you're looking for other editions on a major retailer to even see if you can get a copy of the original text. Now, looking around, I had to take notes because this got very confusing very quickly. But looking around, I was able to find on Amazon currently there are at least two sellers here in the U.S. selling brand new copies of Fleming's James Bond novels. So as far as I can tell, these are just about the only two options you have here in the U.S. if you're looking on Amazon for physical copies of the James Bond novels. And these are both from the 2012 Vintage Classics paperback reprint from the UK. So they're UK paperbacks from the 2012 James Bond Vintage Classics line. So if you are determined to buy a physical copy, your only choices on Amazon are from third-party sellers, UK paperbacks of Goldfinger and Live and Let Die. But both of them are running about $16 or $17 plus shipping costs. So already you're up to about $20 or so for a paperback, which is already more than what the Thomas and Mercer 2012 trade paperbacks were going for per book. But those were the only two in-print new copies I could find anywhere on Amazon. If that wasn't bad enough, there is a particular book you can purchase on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It has Ian Fleming's name on it, but it has nothing to do with Fleming. It is actually one of the many Canadian unauthorized bootleg James Bond novels because due to the nature of Canada's copyright law, there is the ability to publish and write works of fiction using licensed characters in Canada if they hit the public domain. And so there's been a whole flood of different James Bond books in Canada, and they're only meant to be sold in Canada. These are all completely unauthorized. Should you desire, you can actually purchase a physical paperback copy for $7.99 of the book entitled Game of Blood, which actually has Fleming's name on it. It says, and Ian Fleming. This is an unauthorized vampire retelling of Casino Royale. But you can't buy Fleming's James Bond novels on Amazon or Barnes & Noble in physical form. Let that sink in. So then you may think, well, I guess it's time to turn to eBay. Let's go and look at prices there. Well, unfortunately, it seems the panic buying has already started to set in because, as I alluded to before, what got me started on this unfortunate rabbit hole that got more and more depressing is even standard editions, regardless of condition, some of the most common editions here in the US are going for absurd prices. This is including my favorites, the wonderful 1960s Signet paperbacks I have here behind me. These are my favorite versions, the ones I reread every year, and the ones I loved collecting growing up. In average condition, these should sell for no more than $3 to $5 US. They are very common, but it's very tough to get one in very good shape. And then some people prefer the earlier printings compared to the later printings. And there's also a couple variants like movie tie-ins and different things, as with any run of books. So some certain editions are more valuable than others, but generally they are pretty worn and well loved and well read. So in average condition, at the most, in most bookstores or on most eBay listings, they're worth a couple dollars each. Better condition, rarer printing, a bit more depending on what actual what the condition is and the particular edition you're looking at and what the demand there is for it. So the first thing I see are listings for lots of primarily Signet paperbacks, the 60s paperbacks, in all kinds of condition, from having dog-eared pages to blown out spines to ripped covers, some even having no covers, and not even complete sets of all the James Bond novels, mind you, and selling for upwards of $200 or more. And that was worrying. But as I kept going, I decided to look at the sold and completed listings and not just the ones that were getting bid on a lot. And there are some lots that are and listings that are getting significant bids on them. So there is definitely already a growing amount of people turning to eBay and other sources to look for used copies. So the demand has already shot up on used copies of the Bond novels. I don't think it's gotten as bad as it will, and especially if the Harper Collins editions come out here in the US and they are indeed the edited versions. Once that happens in May, I think this is going to be much worse if those are indeed the edited versions. But when I started seeing editions that are very common and not particularly valuable at all, some editions I've picked up over the years simply because they were very cheap and I came across a copy and I figured, no, why not? It's in great shape. But when you start seeing the Macmillan Book Club editions here in the US with the matching gun and I guess you'd say bikini lady covers. I've never known exactly how to refer to these, but these that all have the standard design that are very common. You can get Fleming's novels and these matching hardcovers for not very much money. This is just the one I have of Casino Royale. It's in pretty good shape. I bought this years ago when I was still collecting the novels. But, these should go for no more than, depending on condition. And if you really, for some reason, want this particular edition, these are usually $5 to $10 each. If you had a whole set of them and they were in good shape, maybe a little bit more because you have them all in one and somebody could just buy them as a lot. These are not particularly very valuable. So when I see even just a handful of these going for hundreds of dollars in sold and completed eBay listings, then I know something is really wrong. And if that wasn't enough, then I happened to find listings for the early 1990s US hardcover releases by the MJF imprint that all have these I guess you would call them slightly animated or cartoonish approaches to a particular scene from that novel. These are interesting. They've always been an affordable sort of different edition to have on your shelf if you're an American Bond collector and you just wanted the books in hardcover, but you wanted something that was a little bit different, but was still very affordable. These did not sell very well, apparently, and they never finished the series, so you can only get most of the books in this particular printing style. I even remember they used to have copies of these on remainder tables at Books A Million when I was growing up. That's how I got this copy of Our Majesty's Secret Service, because there I was, a kid trying to collect the Bond novels before the Penguin reprints hit, and they were few and far between. And I was searching antique stores and used bookshops, and lo and behold, this was just sitting on a remainder table one day, and I'm like, what? So this was actually the first copy of OHMSS I ever owned. It's still a nice copy. There's nothing particularly very special about it. There's no introduction or anything fancy. This was originally done in 1991 as the copyright date. But, they look nice. But again, you can't get the complete run of books in this. They never finished. So when I see listings that sold of these for $450, or I found one that sold for $750 US. I was like, okay, now I know something is terribly wrong. So unfortunately, on eBay, the panic buying has already set in, and as I said, it will only get worse if indeed the new Harper Collins editions are going to also be the edited text, which I believe they probably will be. So essentially, the point I'm trying to make, and I've also put up various photos I've taken of a lot of extremely overpriced listings that I've found that sold and completed. So these are actual values that were paid for, again, non-collectible editions, for editions varying in quality, mind you, because I looked at all of these, and most of them were not in mint condition. They're all over the place in terms of the condition of the actual books, and or a mix of editions. None of these are for rare, expensive, valuable editions. So this is when I really started to get worried. And then I looked at retailers for any versions of the original novels, and when I saw all of a sudden the Thomas and Mercer books had been pulled overnight, then I was like, okay, this is not looking good. So then I decided to visit our local used bookshops, and thankfully in my area there are several used bookstores or stores that have a good amount of books, where if you look around for a bit, you can usually find a copy of most things that you might be interested in. And if all else fails, we have a McKay's Books in my area, which, if you've never been to one, is a enormous, almost sort of warehouse store that primarily focuses on books, but of course they sell all kinds of media and even musical instruments and all kinds of different things. But the primary focus is books, and when you go in there, it's literally they have their own custom building, and it's like a warehouse, and the shelves are massive and tall and go as far back as the eye can see. So there are thousands of books in there, and they have a huge turnover. So if you went every week, you would see completely different books, because they're just always having massive amounts of trade-ins and things. It's a book lover's paradise, and you will quickly run out of space in your living area for anything but cheap books you found at that store. But my point is, in going through local bookstores, on any given occasion, you will see usually at least a handful of Fleming editions floating around. And if all else fails, I usually see between 5 or 10 different paperbacks and hardbacks of different eras at that McKay's location anytime I go in there. So I decided I would glance around just to see if people had started buying them, because usually you'll recognize, if you go in on a regular basis, you'll see the same sort of copies here and there. And I was also curious if some stores had caught on and started marking up the price, which is going to be another problem, because anytime there's a demand, people are going to drive the price up, and bookstores will match that. And of course, they have to stay in business. They have to be cognizant of people's desires. But then there are some stores that will follow that religiously and immediately price books higher as soon as there's a demand, or especially if there's a whole wave of people coming in looking for the same specific thing because they're afraid it's going to be completely gone. So I went on this excursion, more of a basically what I usually do, just walking around, shopping in bookstores. But I was just curious to see what was on the shelf. What I didn't expect is that in all the regular bookstores, what I would normally see was totally gone. I'm not in a particular area where there's a lot of hardcore readers, should I say? I mean, I'm still amazed we have some really great bookstores, but there's not. I don't have any friends that read the Bond novels. I can't talk about the literary James Bond anywhere but online. So I've never encountered someone in public besides myself reading the Bond novels. So to suddenly go and find that there are no copies of Fleming anywhere that I normally go and see a couple here and there, that's when I'm like, okay, then this is really bad. So then I went to McKay's, where there's usually 5 or 10 different various Fleming editions, and I included a photo of the shelf here, and as you can see, it is a massive shelf. It's their action adventure section, and they have the hardbacks on one side, and then a variety of different paperbacks. You have to kind of move through the stacks to see all of the spines. And if you do that, you usually find anywhere between 5 and 10 various Fleming editions in both hardback and paperback. I've even found some UK printings there, which I couldn't believe. I don't know how they got there, but they get all kinds of books in that store. And this is where I had it really underlined, because all I found was one. They had one copy, which I have a picture of here, of ironically, the Thomas and Mercer printing of Live and Let Die, which contains the original unaltered UK text and is the most notorious book in terms of the contents being offensive today in 2023, and the book that inspired IFP in terms of their statement of why they did the revisions, that they were following the US revisions of Live and Let Die from 1955. So that didn't make me feel very good. That where I would normally see in between, 3 or 4 different stores, anywhere between 10 to 15, sometimes 20 different copies of Fleming, it's down to 1. That's not a good sign. And I live in an area where it's large enough that we do have multiple bookstores. So if you're in a smaller town and you have maybe one small bookstore, or in terms of independent used bookstore, or you have none, I don't know what you're going to do. Because, of course, even if you were lucky to have a Barnes & Noble in a small town, they're not going to be stocking the original James Bond novels. And once the Harper Collins books come out, if they're edited, that's all you'd have access to. And that's all you'd have access to online. And once they replace the ebooks of the original text, you'd have them on, in terms of ebooks, that's all you'd have access to. So you can see how this argument of people's already is starting to dwindle away, and the new books that are coming out in May aren't even out yet. So then I decided to take it one step further and go to the ultimate sort of last-ditch attempt. And that's simply thinking, okay, well, if worse comes to worse, surely you'd still be able to go to the public library and read the original novels, because surely they would have, they've got all of Fleming's novels. Surely there's no way. And again, in my town, we have a pretty good library system with multiple different branches with interlibrary loan. So even if a particular book you want is not at that particular branch, you can get that copy sent to your branch when it is available and put it on hold for you, which you can then pick up. So that means that their catalog is quite large and spread across multiple branches. So I assumed they would have all of Fleming's James Bond novels. And of course, in various editions, that would still all be the original text, because the edited texts aren't out yet. So I went and looked at the library and looked on the card catalog. And that's where I ran into a problem. So Even going to my local library, that's a pretty good library. It's going to take some doing if I was a brand new reader who wanted to read Fleming's original James Bond novels in order. My local library, in between all the branches, has 11 of the novels. They only have one copy each, in terms and in varying editions. They're not all brand new, obviously. They have one copy each of everything except You Only Live Twice and Octopussy and the Living Daylights. However, they do have a paperback copy of the Quantum of Solace short story collection, which was done, I believe, in 2008. And that actually compiled all the short stories into one. So it's not exactly historically accurate because you're not having access to Octopussy and the Living Daylights as a collection, but at least all the short stories are there and you have access to them that way. So that just leaves You Only Live Twice out. So already right there, even in my area that has a very good library system with a rather substantial catalog and multiple branches, in between all of them, it does not have a physical copy of all of the Bond novels. It is already missing one, of which there is no physical copy. All of the books they have print copies of, they also have in audiobook form, so that's good if you prefer audiobooks. They also have them in ebook form, but of course, most libraries have various servicers for their online media catalog and things. You still log in with your library card, but it's usually not run by the actual library. It's usually run by a third party that they have a contract with. This, of course, means that whoever supplies the ebooks, meaning the publishers, can ostensibly, whenever they feel like it, change hands or change ownership, and thus decide they want to make changes and thus remove the ebooks they provided to not just retailers, but libraries and these third-party services as well, and replace them with changed, altered, or updated versions. So again, we have that problem that we would have if they do this with all the major retailers in terms of the ebooks. Then the library would have no control over this. So already that rules out ebooks. And they do provide an ebook loan of You Only Live Twice. That's the only way you can read that novel in my library catalog system, is by using the separate service to read it as an ebook. So if that gets updated with the altered text, that would rule that book out entirely. So you can already see this is getting even more complicated just going to a library. And if you're, again, in a smaller town with a smaller library, and probably, especially in a very small town that probably only has maybe one or two library branches with a much smaller catalog, your options are going to be even more limited. And that makes me think that when I was growing up again, and we moved around a lot, so I was in a bunch of different small town libraries. And so some of the Bond novels I've read much more than others, because growing up, I could only read Casino Royale and Live and Let Die and Dr. No a lot, in terms of, because that's what they had at libraries. And I had to wait a lot longer to get to Moonraker, which was one of the next ones I finally got to read. And then I would read it over and over because, I only had access to 5 Bond novels. And then it was like they would get unlocked as I would find one in another library or in another used bookshop and got my hands on the Man with the Golden Gun or something. So, of course, I read them out of order, too, which didn't help. And it looks like that situation would start to repeat itself if this scenario continues. And in terms of the physical copies, there's another danger, because as books are read and checked out of libraries, what's the first thing that's going to happen over time? They're going to get worn out. They're going to get damaged. They're going to get irrevocably damaged. And then they're going to have to be replaced. And when you go to replace a book as a library, you're only able to replace it with usually the version that's in print. And if all that's in print is an edited text, you can see where I'm going with this. That means libraries eventually, over time, simply due to wear and damage of physical copies, are going to have to replace books with new editions. And if they're all altered texts, that means eventually, over time, every version in a library will be an altered text. So then you really have no options. So this, unfortunately, is a very negative and not a very happy outlook, but I just merely followed the logical chain of events, and one thing led me to another. And this, again, is all based around the thought that these new Harper Collins editions here in the U.S. are going to be the edited versions. Again, I sincerely hope they're not. So if they're not, even with the covers being absolute crap, you should still purchase them because there's no telling if they're not edited when edited versions would come out over here and fully supplant the original text. So this is not me trying to make people worried, but I just simply started digging around out of curiosity because I wondered if and when this might happen, how difficult it would be to get copies of Fleming's novels unaltered. And the problem is, it kind of is already hard, at least here in the US. Again, I can only speak for those of us here in the US, but I would assume it's similar in the UK in terms of the versions that were in print have been pulled and removed. And ironically, the only other option you have currently right now to get the original text is actually going to the Folio Society and their beautiful custom handmade editions with the beautiful artwork and the slip boxes that are numbered, beautiful collector's editions that are also rather expensive. They are about $75 US each, and they've been doing beautiful work with them one at a time, but I just really haven't had the money to invest into those. And I have so many other editions, it would be lovely to have them, but they are rather pricey, and it is an investment. But ironically, as far as I'm aware, that is the only way you can actually purchase new editions of the original Fleming texts, at least here in the US, for the run of books. Again, outside of some third-party sellers on Amazon selling various editions and claiming them as new, that's your only option, because the used market is already shooting up in terms of prices and demand, and availability is really going down. And even in my area, where there's not a whole lot of demand for Bond novels, and you usually see anywhere between 10 and 20 between all the bookstores at any given time, and now we're down to just one. So yeah, I think the argument of, oh, well, people can just go get old copies, that doesn't really hold water, because most people are not, most people are not going to want to look beyond major retailers, period. Most people nowadays like to read digitally. Most people like ebooks. I don't think many people are going to go beyond looking on Amazon or Barnes & Noble and then maybe doing a cursory eBay search, or if they happen to have a good local used bookstore, maybe taking a cursory glance around. And even if they find copies, probably not going to want to pay the higher price premiums that they're going to have attached to them because of this censorship process. And I can certainly tell you, no one new to the books who is simply wanting to read them for the first time is going to do this amount of work that I did just doing and preparing for this video. These are the notes I took, because as I decided to look at one thing, which then led me to look at another thing, and then I looked at not just Amazon, but Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and every other major retailer I could think of, and I started running into brick walls and roadblocks. I'm like, oh, wait, what? And then I decided to look at local bookstores, and I was seeing nothing on the shelves, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. But the real thing is when I realized that it would be even difficult to read all of the novels currently at my own public library. And then, of course, you start thinking even more negative hypothetical thoughts of the what ifs and so on and so forth. And it really strikes me because, again, I grew up without having access to the books. I remember what it was like to simply not be able to read a book because I didn't have access to it. I couldn't go and buy a copy in a bookstore. I couldn't find it at a used bookstore. until one would pop up. I couldn't get it at the library. I could only get certain ones. And so you're stuck with what you have, and then you usually just reread it over and over, or you lose interest eventually, and you sort of move on to other things naturally. So in short, I'm not trying to get anybody to start panic buying the Bond novels, but I do want people to think about the connotations that any sort of editing or alteration of a work of art would entail in terms of what that does for trying to preserve the original work. And once demand increases, then it becomes more difficult to obtain versions of that original work. And just simply going from one thing to another, it just in the past few days, just as what started as simple curiosity turned into this whole thing of I kept finding it increasingly difficult, and just trying to imagine myself as a first-time reader of the Bond novels who just wanted to have a physical copy of each book to read for the first time. It's not easy. And books that normally would sell for a couple dollars online are already starting to go for far more than they're worth, and in some cases for absurd dollar amounts, which I can't understand at all, except for that's already a sign of people who are increasingly desperate to at least have some physical edition of the original Bond novels. The eBay prices have not gotten crazy across the board as of yet, but again, I think that the real issue is going to be, again, when the Harper Collins US editions come out in May, and also the editions in the UK. Once those arrive, if here in the U.S., if they are going to indeed be these edited texts, which I can only assume, I'm pretty sure they probably will be. And in the UK, if there is no announcement or decision by IFP to also in some form offer the original text, which they haven't said anything. I've seen some things maybe suggest they might have limited editions or special editions or custom orders of editions that contain the original unaltered text, but again, none of that has been put into writing, so that's merely conjecture at this point. But it's really going to depend on what these new editions are going to look like. In the US, will these new editions with the terrible covers indeed be the new edited versions, or will they still be another reprinting of the original unaltered text? If they are, then you should buy those as soon as possible, because that's really going to be your only easily available option here in the US for the original text, in spite of having atrocious cover art designs. And in the UK, it sounds like you'll be pretty much flat out of luck until IFP announces a sort of special run of the original text, if they even decide to do that. Again, this is merely conjecture at this point. So ultimately, this is not a pleasant situation to be in. It's completely unnecessary, and it's entirely because of IFP deciding on this process of altering the novels at their discretion, which is really a terrible idea and has been taken much too far. So I don't think IFP had bad intentions. I think their intentions were good, but I don't think this is the way to go about it. As I said in my video about the actual censoring of the books. But it's also going to make it extremely difficult for everyone trying to just obtain unaltered copies of the books, because, again, that will drive demand up to such a point that in a market where they're already drying up, which is crazy to think of, but that's what I have experienced just this week, in the past few days, looking around in both in person and online. It's going to make it incredibly difficult and expensive and a chore, and that's going to be work that most people are not going to want to put in. And so they're probably either going to decide just to not read the books at all instead of reading an altered version, or unfortunately, they'll read the altered versions anyway, or they'll read the altered versions and have no idea they've been altered. So it doesn't help anyone, and unfortunately, it's already becoming difficult to obtain any printing of the original novels without having to hunt around and pay a price premium. So your only options for the original text now in the U.S. from major retailers are the one or two third-party sellers on Amazon with various copies of some of the books. And then between all the retailers, you can get most, if not all, of the original text, but only in ebook and audiobook form. And unfortunately, that's the way it stands as of now. So this was not a video I was ever going to make. This was just something that I kind of wondered. I'm like, hey, I wonder if there's any crazy eBay prices or something as of yet. And then one thing led to another. And then I would say to myself, well, I wonder what the local stores look like. And I'm like, well, surely there's something on Amazon, or Barnes and Noble has something. And then finding nothing there, and then getting more desperate and looking at other places. And ultimately, when I realized that I wouldn't even be able to go to my own local public library and be able to check out a physical edition of all of the books, that was really when it hit me. And I'm like, this is not good. Even if it doesn't get to that point, that wouldn't be good for any work of art. So it is certainly food for thought. And myself, like every other Bond fan, hopes that IFP changes their mind, even though it's very close to the publication date of these new altered texts, so it may not be possible to stop said process, like what was done with the proposal to change the Roald Dahl books. But it's not something that should be repeated. It's not something that should be done, and it's not something that should be supported. So I would say, if you're interested in the Bond novels, it may be a good idea to start picking up copies if you don't have them sooner rather than later. Again, there's no... it's not definite that access will be completely removed to all of the original texts, but without any further information or word from IFP or Harper Collins or anyone, one can only assume and make an educated guess that that may indeed, unfortunately, be the case. So before the market gets even more difficult to navigate in trying to get various editions, you may want to pick up copies and just to have them and be able to read them, especially if you've never read the novels before. So unfortunately, that's a very negative thought, but I was truly shocked and surprised at how quickly this has happened, because and just even in the past year, if you wanted to piece together all the Bond novels and have a copy of them, you could do so, and it wouldn't really cost you very much. It would all depend on condition and what editions you wanted, and you could just go and buy all the Thomas and Mercer copies at $15 each, and you were fine. That's all you had to do. You can't do that anymore. So that's not a pleasant thought, and I don't know what positive there would be out of this other than IFP reversing their decision, or at the very least announcing that they will indeed make sure the original text will still be offered and available to the public, which should have been the case all along. If you were going to do the altering of the text, you should always make sure that the original version is still available and is not removed from print and is not basically hidden away from public access. So that's what we need to see. And we also need to find out if the Harper Collins editions will indeed be edited or be a final reprinting of the original text. So, unfortunately, again, that's a very negative thing to imagine, but this is the natural course of things you're going to run into whenever you discuss censoring or altering a work and then removing access to the original work. There is, of course, going to then be a greater demand for the original work, and the editions of the original work will start to dry up and thus go up in price. So I do encourage all Bond fans to speak up on this issue. Roland, who has a great channel and has done many videos so far on the censoring of Fleming's work, has started a petition on change.org, which I encourage you to go and sign if you're as passionate about this topic as I am, and I'll leave a link in the description below. Again, this is not meant to make anyone worry about the Bond novels disappearing, but it doesn't bode well for the future, unfortunately. So, this was just something I started. It just started unraveling in front of me, and I just sort of went down a rabbit hole. But I thought it was important enough to make a video about, and hopefully get the rest of the Bond fan community talking, because this is a very important topic for all James Bond fans, and even greater than that, it's an important discussion to have about the censoring of art in general, and why it's, it may be seen as a good idea in theory by some people, but in practice it's not necessarily a very good thing. So yeah, it's not a pleasant thought, to think that things could dry up that fast in terms of availability, but it already looks like it has indeed started. So I just want to end by saying, do not support this type of revisionism decades after the fact in terms of rewriting an author's work, no matter how good the intentions are. Do not support the alteration of the James Bond books. Do not purchase them. Do not read them. Do not support them in any way. It is not something that should be done. The censoring of art is not something that should be really done by anyone. And for reasons I went over in one of my previous videos, I think the Bond fan community really should get together and be rather vocal about this issue. And again, I do highly encourage people to check out and sign the petition I mentioned. And again, the link is in the description. So it's, again, a sad thought to consider, but I did think it was important to go over. And I do thank you ever so much for watching.